Of course, man's activity in space began with Sputnik, and I think we'll all be familiar with this, the beautiful design of the Sputnik satellite, which I always was an admirer of. It's not much as far as its technical specification goes. It was roughly the size of a basketball, and all it did was emit an electric signal, a radio signal that's a beep that could be picked up by antennae on Earth. And it circled the Earth. It was put into orbit in 1957, and it was the first great success of the Russians. Both the United States and Russia were, of course, racing to log achievements in outer space. And Sputnik, the Russians won that first round by putting Sputnik into orbit. It's a little known fact, of course. Sputnik gets all of the recognition, but the United States soon afterwards put its own satellite into orbit, which is known as the Explorer. And one last thing, I have to say that what strikes me most about the Sputnik is its beautiful design. If you look at satellites these days, they look like a mishmash of different electronic parts, but the Sputnik was clean and beautiful, and its swept back antennae make it look like it's in motion, even when it's standing still. So I'm an admirer of the artists that were involved in that project. So this is a more typical satellite, also beautiful in its own way. I think the artistic beauty of satellites has maybe declined through the years, but this has its own charm. And this was a telecommunications satellite. And I'm going to be talking, really emphasizing in this early part of the presentation, how space activity in the space industry has evolved. And the original applications, the uses of outer space, we're all familiar with. It's based on satellites like this one. This is a Telstar satellite, a telecommunications satellite to bounce signals off of so that we can communicate very easily from one part of the Earth to the other. So telecommunications is one of the traditional uses of outer space. Remote sensing, in plain language, that is taking photographs of the Earth. We are all familiar with that if you look at Google Earth today. But for many years, we had cartographers, map makers, using photographs from outer space to make maps or to observe different phenomena on the surface of the Earth, be it weather systems or natural disasters, or looking at now satellites can be used to look at parking lots to determine which businesses are successful, where is there greater traffic. All you have to do is look from outer space and see where the cars are parked. So these are some of the traditional uses of outer space: remote sensing, telecommunications. Another application of outer space that is very commonly known and we're all familiar with is GPS, which we use on our cell phones in order to determine our location. So navigation is another long-standing use of outer space. But what has changed is that these are no longer the exclusive uses of outer space. And then we have new uses of outer space: space tourism, extraction of natural resources, private space stations. These are the big changes. And these changes in the industry are driving changes in the law. And that's why this field of law is so exciting right now. This is a transformational phase that will last, this particular phase, I'd say, for the next 10, 20 years to really reorient the corpus of space law to its new commercial realities. But that isn't the only trend I'd like to bring to your attention. The other one is the movement of space activity from the province of government agencies to private corporations and private individuals. That doesn't mean that corporations haven't always been involved. They always have been from the beginning. If we look at, and these are, of course, the antennae that are earthbound, that are part of the space-based telecommunications infrastructure. We have these beautiful satellite arrays that communicate with our satellites in orbit. But if you look at the early achievements of the US government in outer space, this is the Saturn V rocket that transported astronauts to the surface of the moon. if you look at that rocket, who was it built by? Of course, your first impulse would be to say NASA. And that's right, that NASA was the prime contractor, was overseeing the project. But there were other people involved, and those were private entities, such as Boeing, McDonnell Douglas, Lockheed Martin, North American Aviation, whom my mother worked for, believe it or not, setting into, I think, motion a family tradition that has led to this presentation today. So private organizations, private entities, corporations have always been involved in the space activity, but what has changed is that they're no longer working for NASA. Now they're working for themselves. And NASA is merely a customer, buying seats, for example, on SpaceX's Dragon capsule to taxi NASA astronauts from the surface of the Earth to the International Space Station. So the nature of space activities has changed, and then the identity of the actors, the space actors, has changed. And the regulation of this private activity, the private individuals, that is of a new nature, that's where the challenges arise. Of course, this is a famous picture of Buzz Aldrin standing on the surface of the moon after we planted a flag. And this will turn up later in a different segment of this presentation. And why don't I take a second to lay out a roadmap for where this presentation is going. I'm going to continue to give an overview of the nature of space activity. And then we're going to turn our sights to the law. What is space law? Where does it come from? Who makes it? And then what are some of its general principles? And then what I think is the most important one, and the item that you're probably all here for, is what are the challenges? What is the work to be done for the next generation of space lawyers? And I'm talking to you. You are the next generation of space lawyers. The Global Space Law Center is here to educate you and prepare you for a career in space law. Lawrina is here to provide you the resources, the access to legislation, and the primary sources of space law. But you are the ones that are actually going to determine what the shape of space law in the future is going to be. And I will try to direct your mind and give you some focus by telling you what the problems are. And you can start thinking about them today, because they are far from being solved. But this is a picture of our traditional space activity managed by NASA. Where have we gone from there? Well, we built a reusable space plane, the shuttle. And that was a huge step forward because it was reusable. We didn't have to throw a rocket away every time we went on a space mission. Imagine driving to the grocery store and throwing away your car, sending it to the junkyard every time and having to spend another $30,000 on a car. Well, that's what has traditionally been done. The space shuttle was a huge step forward towards reusability. However, its design was such that it really didn't provide the financial benefit that was hoped. It cost $1 billion to recondition it for a next launch. And there were portions of the space shuttle launch system that weren't reusable, such as the booster rockets that it was tied to. So it was a step in the right direction, but it was not yet the Holy Grail. And it is that Holy Grail of reusability that we've only recently discovered through the work of SpaceX and Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and their work, but more on that in a moment. I have to say, you might recognize the young man there without a hat is me. And I was taking a look at the space shuttle with my mom, Gisela Sundahl, and my brother, John Max. So that's another bit of the history of this space lawyer. The International Space Station is perhaps our greatest achievement. It's the most complex and the most expensive thing that has ever been built by man. I believe the value of it is approaching $1 trillion, but its lifespan is also about to expire. If it reaches 2030, I think we'll be fortunate, and that'll be the last great outpost in orbital space that is controlled exclusively by the government. What is coming next? Private activity. And this is the beginning of it. This is the landing of 2 rocket boosters simultaneously after the launch of a Falcon 9 rocket by SpaceX. This is beautiful ballet. It's rocket, it's art in motion. But this is the holy grail, is to be able to reuse rockets. And the importance of that is that it reduces the cost of achieving orbit and achieving transportation to the moon or beyond by exponentially. It has gone down. It will be cut in half, and then half again, half again, half again, making space accessible for the common man, for the common company, much more accessible than ever before. And what does that mean? In turn, that means that business models and activities that were never possible before because they were simply too expensive are now possible. So a lot of ideas are being taken off the shelf, things that were proposed long ago, but were simply unsustainable because it costs too much to, for example, build and keep aloft private manufacturing facilities in orbit to develop stem cell-based pharmaceuticals. Very promising, very much needed. The benefits of outer space are undeniable, the zero-gravity environment for manufacturing such things, but was just too expensive. But now that those costs have come down, those business models are now back on track. And new business models are being developed every day. So I ask you to think creatively about that. You may be the lawyer who provides the advice and guidance to these companies that are pushing the bounds of what is possible, or you may actually be the executive and the founder of a company that develops new uses of outer space. So think large, think big, be aggressive, dream fiercely, because the future will be extraordinary. And now we're getting into some of the new applications in space, some of the new uses of outer space. It's no longer simply telecommunication, remote sensing, navigation and GPS, weather forecasting, all helpful things. But now we're adding to that list. And one of the things that's being added is space tourism. And this is a new design of a new spacecraft, a reusable spacecraft again. Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk, and through Blue Origin and SpaceX, respectively, have developed their reusable rockets. But Virgin Galactic, pictured here, their Spaceship 2, I believe it is, although they developed a beautiful silvery metallic Spaceship 3 already, which is larger and faster and better, will be sending tourists for $250,000 a ticket for now, and maybe it's gone up to 400 grand, but we'll be sending tourists into outer space, and we've already had a few flights. We all saw Sir Richard Branson on the maiden flight for tourists, and this space plane can go into suborbital space. At this point, no further, but hey, you have to take one step before you take the next. So space tourism, private space stations. I mentioned that the International Space Station will be retired in the near future, or it will be sold off to private investors who will then rehab it and retrofit it and maybe stretch its lifespan. But what is also happening is that there are multiple companies. This is Blue Origin's space station, but multiple companies are planning to build free-flying private space stations. So imagine, now we can, it used to be that only NASA astronauts, that is test pilots who are rigorously trained for years, and earned a spot on a rocket owned by NASA, would fly to the International Space Station, also owned at least partly by NASA and our international partners, to conduct scientific missions. That is the old model. NASA astronauts, NASA Space Station, scientific missions. Now what we're looking at is an ordinary person, if you have the money, of course, can buy a seat on the SpaceX Dragon capsule, fly to the Blue Origin space station, and maybe play zero gravity soccer in one of these large modules that are part of the space station. That is, engage in recreational uses of outer space. Or perhaps there will be a yoga retreat in a zero gravity atmosphere of a private space station. Or you could go on spacewalks. Those are recreational activities, but of course there will also be commercial activities such as zero gravity manufacturing and other types of private research as well. Scientific research in space won't go away, of course, but it will share the spotlight now with private commercial uses and private recreational uses. And that is the extraordinary leap that has suddenly happened. Yes, there were many years leading to it, but it has suddenly come to fruition, and now is the time for commercial space. And there has not been enough education in the field of space law, and there is a need for space lawyers because the field of space law is notoriously complex. And therefore it needs properly trained space lawyers. It needs you to study space law, to provide the guidance, and ultimately even help draft and enact new legislation that will facilitate the continued expansion of the industry. Of course, our plans are bigger than free-flying space stations in orbit. We are on our way, led by NASA and the Artemis program, with international partners that have joined the team. We are building an international space station in orbit around the moon, the lunar gateway, that will then serve as the halfway point for vessels that will land astronauts and equipment on the surface of the moon. And that is merely a testing ground for similar plans to go to Mars. And this is a model of the Martian community that is envisioned by Elon Musk. And there you see his starships, the 4 starships that are on the landing pads there. And I don't have a picture of this for you, but you may have seen it. It's a very large rocket capable of transporting 100 people into orbit, to the lunar surface, and ultimately to Mars. And this is intended to be quickly reusable. SpaceX is building intends to build a fleet of hundreds of these, and to have them constantly launching and ferrying people to the surface of Mars and building a city of 1 million people. That is the ultimate goal. Many steps between here and there, but that is the future.